There is a place in the North Atlantic where the map says there is land, but the land itself refuses to stay still. It is a thin, shifting crescent of quartz sand, a sliver of white against an oppressive, gray ocean. To the sailors of the last 4 centuries, it wasn't just an island, it was a ghost. They called it the graveyard of the Atlantic, a place that has swallowed more than 350 ships. But here is the paradox. The island is made of nothing but sand, yet it acts as a massive, invisible, underwater obstacle. It doesn't just wait for ships to crash, it actually drags them into its depths. Today, we are going to look at not just the wreckage, but the actual mechanism of this island, the way it decides what to keep buried and what it chooses to reveal. I mean, can an island that constantly erases its own geography ever truly give up its dead? Imagine the approach. You are 290 kilometers east of Halifax, Nova Scotia. The horizon is a flat, seamless blur where the Atlantic meets a heavy, suffocating fog. Then, through the haze, a sliver of white appears. This is Sable Island. It's 40 kilometers long, and in some places, barely wide enough to see both oceans at once. As you step onto the shore, the wind is relentless, carrying the scent of salt and old decay. The ground beneath your boots is not soil, but a fine, pale grit that shifts with every step. There are no trees here, no mountains, only dunes that roll like frozen waves under a colorless sky. It's not just an island, it's a trap designed by the ocean. And if you look closely at the crest of a dune, you might see something unnatural. The rusted tip of an anchor, or a blackened rib of oak, protruding from the sand like a bone from a grave. Why does this strip of sand claim so many lives? Well, the answer lies in the violent physics of the Atlantic. Sable Island sits exactly where 2 massive oceanic currents collide, the freezing Labrador Current flowing south and the warm Gulf Stream pushing north. When these 2 meet, they create a permanent, thick shroud of fog that can blind a captain in seconds. A ship sailing from Europe to North America might think they are miles away from land, only to find the breakers crashing against their hull. The island is a predator of geography. It shifts its position, its dunes migrate, and its shoals extend and retract. The sea doesn't just push ships toward the sand, it sucks them in. Over 350 recorded wrecks, thousands of souls have been absorbed into this pale expanse. This is not a static place. It is a living, moving trap. Let's go back to 1812. A convoy of ships led by the HMS Barbados is sailing from Bermuda toward Newfoundland. The mission is critical. The ships are sturdy and the crews are experienced. But the Atlantic does not care about experience. As the convoy enters the haze, the visibility drops to nearly zero. The captains are navigating by dead reckoning, guessing their position based on speed and direction. But they aren't accounting for the invisible pull of the currents. Slowly, the HMS Barbados and its companions are drawn toward the crescent. There is no sudden crash, no dramatic explosion. Instead, there is the sound of grinding wood, the slow, agonizing scream of a hull being ripped open by quartz sand. One by one, the ships are grounded. The sailors struggle in the surf, fighting against a current that wants to pull them back into the deep. For those who made it to the shore, the horror was only beginning. They found themselves on a wasteland of sand, with no fresh water and no shelter, watching the remnants of their fleet be swallowed by the tide. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as maritime legends, but modern archaeology is proving that the sand remembers everything. When researchers dig into the dunes, they aren't just finding debris, they are finding time capsules. One of the most chilling discoveries is the broad arrow. This is a specific mark used by the British government to denote crown property. Finding a piece of timber stamped with the broad arrow, alongside fragments of Bermuda cedar, a wood not native to the island, provides a forensic link to the Lost Convoys of the 19th century. Imagine finding a mark on a piece of wood that hasn't seen the sun in 2 centuries. The detective work is grueling. The sand shifts, the dunes migrate, and a wreck that was visible in 1920 might be buried under 10 meters of sand by 2024. The archaeologists are racing against a clock they cannot see, trying to map a graveyard that refuses to stay in one place. There is a profound, cruel irony in the way Sable Island operates. The island is the thief, but it is also the only witness. It chooses when to reveal its secrets. A storm might blow away a dune, and suddenly, a skeletal remains of a schooner from the 1700s is exposed, giving us a brief window into a forgotten tragedy. But then, the wind changes. Within a few weeks, the sand flows back, erasing the site as if it never existed. There is a genuine urgency to these digs. If we don't document the wreckage now, the island will simply reclaim it. It feels less like archaeology and more like a negotiation with a shapeshifter. We are begging the sand to let us see the dead, and the island only grants us a glimpse before pulling the curtain shut again. To understand why the wrecks survive, you have to understand the geology of the sand. Sable Island isn't a fixed landmass, it's a biological and geological clock. The island is constantly migrating. Erosion eats away at the western end, while new sand accumulates at the east. But inside the dunes, something strange happens. The sand is anaerobic, meaning it's devoid of oxygen. When a ship is buried quickly by a shifting dune, it is sealed in a vacuum. This prevents the wood from rotting. This is why researchers find timbers from the 1700s that still look like they were cut yesterday. The sand here doesn't just move, it breathes. It inhales the ships, preserves them in a cold, airless sleep, and then decades or centuries later, it exhales them back to the surface. The island is a vault, and its locks are made of wind and quartz. For a long time, the only humans on Sable Island were the wreckers. These were opportunistic scavengers who lived on the fringes of the island, waiting for ships to crash so they could loot the cargo before the tide took it. They were vultures of the Atlantic, profiting from the desperation of the drowning. But by 1801, the tide turned. The British government established the Humane Establishment. They built life-saving stations manned by crews who risked their lives to pull survivors from the surf. The transition from looting to saving was a battle against nature. These men lived in utter isolation, their lives governed by the roar of the breakers and the breakers' roar. They weren't just fighting the ocean. They were fighting the crushing loneliness of a place that felt like the end of the world. If you walk across the island today, the violence of its history is hidden beneath a layer of deceptive peace. The most striking residents are the wild horses, hundreds of them, roaming the dunes in small herds. They are descendants of ships that wrecked centuries ago, survivors of the same currents that killed their human counterparts. Then there are the gray seals, lounging on the beaches, indifferent to the ghosts beneath them. There is a haunting contrast here. The horses graze over graves they will never know exist. The sand is a blanket that covers both the gold of lost empires and the bones of sailors. Nature has reclaimed the graveyard, turning a place of absolute terror into a sanctuary of silence. Despite the work of the lifesavers and archaeologists, there are gaps in the record that will never be filled. There are mass graves on the island, unmarked pits where the victims of countless wrecks were buried in haste. We think of the SS Hungarian, a tragedy associated with the region's treacherous waters, as a reminder of how many people simply vanished. On Sable Island, the dead are not just lost, they are misplaced. Because the island moves, the graves move. A cemetery established in 1850 might have shifted a kilometer to the east by now, or been swallowed entirely by a migrating dune. There are thousands of bodies beneath the sand, and we no longer know exactly where they are. The island has not just taken their lives, it has stolen their resting places. Sable Island is not a graveyard in the traditional sense. It is not a static place of memory, but a living organism of quartz and wind. It has swallowed 350 ships, and it continues to hold them in its airless grip. One day, a storm will tear through the dunes, and a blackened rib of oak will emerge from the white sand, a piece of the HMS Barbados, or perhaps a ship that history forgot to name. For a few days, the world will see it. And then, the wind will shift. The quartz sand will flow back, the dune will close, and the secret will be buried once more. We are left with a single, unsettling thought. If the island decides to erase the evidence of 350 ships, what else is it hiding in the depths of the sand? Which ghosts are still waiting for the wind to change?